You'd think a woman in her 60s would have better things to do than obsess over a pair of wind chimes. But no, not Karen. It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning, one of those perfect suburban days when the breeze is soft, birds are chirping, and my wife, Lena, is humming along as she arranges fresh flowers in the kitchen window. The chimes I bought her for our anniversary, small, handcrafted from brass and cedar, tuned to a peaceful minor key, clinked lightly in the wind. That's when the knock came. Not a neighborly tap. No, it was 3 rapid bangs, sharp, commanding, like a drill sergeant had found a code infraction on the front lines. Lena opened the door, already knowing who it would be. Karen. HOA president. Self-appointed ruler of our cul-de-sac. The type who printed out bylaws on pastel cardstock and wore them like armor under her Ralph Lauren cardigans. She stood there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her perfectly contoured nose, lips pursed in a line that said she wasn't here to chat. "You're in violation," she said, skipping any form of greeting. Section 12, Paragraph 4b, no exterior sound-generating devices may be hung or installed in a manner audible beyond property lines. Lena blinked. "You mean the chimes?" Karen nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally caught a criminal in the act. Lena, calm as ever, leaned against the doorframe. "They're quieter than your husband's leaf blower at 7 a.m. on Saturdays." Karen didn't flinch. "This isn't a negotiation. You have 48 hours to remove them. Or you'll be fined." And with that, she spun on her heel and strutted down our front steps like she'd just delivered a verdict at The Hague. We didn't remove the wind chimes. That Friday, a bright yellow envelope arrived. It was an official-looking document titled Notice of Fine, Violation of HOA Bylaws. The amount, $1,000. I laughed. Lena didn't. She stared at the paper for a long time, then said, "She's escalating." I knew that tone. My wife doesn't rattle easily. She's a 911 dispatcher. She's talked people through house fires, heart attacks, and high-speed chases. But Karen's breed of petty tyranny? That hit a different nerve. Lena walked straight out to the front porch, wind chimes softly whispering behind her, and called Karen on speakerphone. "Hi, this is Lena Collins. I received your fine." Karen's voice crackled through, full of feigned sweetness. "Yes, and I trust you'll be paying it promptly?" "No," Lena replied flatly. There was a pause. Then a quiet scoff. "I'll give you one more chance to comply," Karen said. "Otherwise, I'll be forced to take action." Lena's response was simple. "Do what you have to." An hour later, the police arrived. 2 squad cars. Lights flashing. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to see Karen flagging them down like she was reporting a hostage situation. She pointed toward our house, yelling, "She's armed and uncooperative." My heart stopped. She? Lena was still inside, calmly sipping tea. But I knew what Karen was trying to do. Weaponize fear. I met the officer halfway down the driveway, hands up, showing I had nothing in them. The younger of the two, Officer Brady, nodded at me and said, "Sir, we received a call about a potential threat involving a firearm. Is everyone inside safe?" I nodded. "Yes, my wife's inside. She's unarmed. She's also a licensed concealed carry holder." He raised an eyebrow. "Can you ask her to step out and speak with us?" I called to Lena, who appeared moments later with her wallet in hand. As she walked down the steps, the tension in the air could have cracked glass. Officer Brady asked for ID. She handed him her driver's license and her concealed carry badge. That's when everything changed. Brady's eyes widened slightly. He glanced at the badge, then back at Lena. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "thank you for your service. Are you currently armed?" She nodded. "Not at the moment. But I am trained. Dispatcher. 10 years. He looked down at the badge again, then back at Karen, who was still flapping her arms in outrage on the sidewalk. Brady turned toward her. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "there's no cause for concern. This resident is within her rights. There's no law being broken. Karen's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. But, she threatened, she. Brady cut her off. Did she brandish a weapon? Karen hesitated. No, but she refused to take down the wind chimes. I kid you not. That was her big reveal. Brady looked at Lena. Then at me. Then back at Karen. With a small shake of his head, he said, "Ma'am, you're dangerously close to filing a false report. I'm going to have to document this." Then he turned back to Lena. "Thank you for your cooperation. Stay safe." And he saluted her. A full, respectful, military-style salute. Lena nodded. "You too, officer." Karen watched in stunned silence as the officers walked back to their cars. Her face was a mosaic of disbelief, rage, and embarrassment. She had expected a takedown. A confrontation. Instead, she'd just been upstaged by someone with real authority, and the training to back it up. But that was just the beginning. Because what Karen didn't know, not yet, anyway, was that Lena had already started digging into the HOA's finances. And what she found would change everything. After the police left, and Karen finally trudged back to her house in what I can only describe as a wounded goose march, Lena turned to me and said something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "She's cooked her own goose. Now we just need to preheat the oven." See, when you live under an HOA like ours, everything feels like it's hanging by threads of invisible red tape. But Lena, she knows how to read knots. And she had already started pulling on one. The next day, she called in sick. Not to lie around, but to dig. She opened her laptop, brewed a pot of strong tea, and surrounded herself with color-coded folders, legal pads, and HOA bylaws. Her job as a 911 dispatcher had trained her brain to think in layers: urgency, protocol, risk, but she also knew enough administrative law to be dangerous. What she uncovered over the next 48 hours would peel back the glossy HOA facade and expose something rotten at the core. It started with the fine itself. The $1,000 citation for the wind chimes wasn't listed in the HOA's publicly accessible rulebook. The clause Karen quoted, Section 12, Paragraph 4b, didn't exist in the current version. But it did appear in an older, draft version Lena found on the HOA's Google Drive, buried in the Karen's personal notes folder. Yes, she found it through a shared link that Karen had foolishly included in a community-wide email back in January. Lena clicked through the document history. The paragraph had been inserted, and later deleted, months ago. But somehow, it had reappeared in citations like ours. Which means, Lena muttered, eyes gleaming behind her reading glasses, Karen is issuing fines using clauses that were never ratified. But it got worse. A deep scroll through the digital ledger revealed line items that didn't make sense. Thousands of dollars in legal consultations. A $3,200 payment for security upgrades listed under Karen's home address. And multiple checks paid to Whitmore Management Services. "That's not a registered business," Lena whispered, typing the name into a state licensing database. "But it is Karen's maiden name." She leaned back, cracked her knuckles, and said, "Okay. Game on." That Saturday morning, we hosted a garage sale, but this wasn't about cleaning out the attic. It was bait. Lena hung the wind chimes front and center. We parked 2 lawn chairs next to a card table stacked with lemonade and cookies. The chimes danced in the breeze, and it didn't take long for Karen to appear. She strode up, phone in hand, already recording. "You are in violation again," she hissed. "You're pushing it, Lena. This is direct defiance." Lena didn't even flinch. She poured 2 lemonades, one for herself, one for Karen, and slid the HOA bylaws across the table. "You might want to read this version. It's the one actually filed with the county clerk." Karen's smug expression faltered. "And," Lena continued, "I've contacted 3 other residents. All fined for similar so-called infractions. We've started a coalition. We're calling ourselves Chimes of Liberty. Catchy, right? Karen dropped her phone an inch. You're bluffing. Oh? Lena smiled sweetly. Then maybe the county auditor won't mind hearing how HOA dues are being funneled into your husband's landscaping company. Karen's face drained of color. And before you think about deleting anything, Lena said, tapping her phone, I've downloaded the files. With screenshots. Timestamps. Metadata. We've got it all. Karen stepped back. This is harassment. No, Lena said, standing slowly. What you've been doing is harassment. What I'm doing is called accountability. That night, we weren't sure what would happen next. But at 2 a.m., a vehicle slowed outside our house. No one knocked. No one spoke. But in the morning, the wind chimes were gone. Stolen. The hook they'd hung from was twisted. A single cedar slat was left dangling like a wounded limb. I thought Lena would be furious. Instead, she smiled and whispered, now she's trespassed. Finally. Lena filed a police report. Then she contacted the HOA treasurer, a mild-mannered widower named Paul who rarely spoke during meetings. But when Lena explained what she'd uncovered, he invited her to coffee. What he shared next blew the lid off everything. Karen hadn't just falsified fines. She'd forged signatures on meeting minutes. Pushed changes through without quorum. Misallocated thousands. And the final nail? She'd pressured Paul into silence by threatening to audit his late wife's gardening shed, which violated a paint code by 3 shades of green. She's a tyrant, Paul said, hands trembling. I didn't think anyone could stop her. Lena leaned in, eyes bright with purpose. Oh, Paul. We're not just going to stop her. We're going to make sure she never does this to anyone again. By Monday morning, Lena had built a case so airtight it whistled. What she needed now was amplification. And that came in the form of a town hall meeting. Karen had scheduled it herself, hoping to pass another urgent amendment about exterior decorations. She clearly thought she was about to expand her tiny empire, completely unaware that Lena was about to light the fuse on its foundation. We arrived early. Paul, the treasurer, sat to Lena's left, clutching a thick manila folder. To her right, Miss Carroll, the sweet woman who'd been fined for planting sunflowers 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. Behind us sat James from across the street, fined for a basketball hoop his son installed over spring break, and Nia, who got a citation for leaving a garden hose coiled non-symmetrically. Karen walked in last, her usual pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her clipboard under one arm, and a smug smile that said, I run this place. Let's begin, she said, and tapped her gavel on the folding table with unnecessary flair. We have a few agenda items. Lena stood. Actually, I have one. And it's about itemized disbursements from the HOA's reserve fund. Karen blinked. I beg your pardon? Lena handed out copies of a spreadsheet, printed in full color, with highlighted entries and annotated discrepancies. Over the past 12 months, more than $14,000 has been paid to vendors that don't appear on our registered contractor list. One of them, Whitmore Management Services, is unlicensed. Another, Luxscape Lawn, is owned by your husband. Murmurs filled the room. Karen's face went taut. That's none of your concern. It is, Lena replied calmly, because the HOA bylaws explicitly state that all expenditures must be approved by a quorum and documented in meeting minutes. She pulled out the minutes. These, however, have forged signatures. I called Barbara Greer myself, she moved to Arizona last year. Her signature here? Lena tapped the paper. Added in October. The room gasped. Lies. Karen barked, slamming her hand down. You're just mad because you broke the rules. Paul stood. No, Karen. We're mad because you did. I kept quiet too long, but I won't anymore. Karen turned to him. You wouldn't have the books without me. No, he said, voice shaking. But I have copies now. And I've sent them to the County Oversight Board. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. That's when Lena dropped the final piece. The wind chimes? Still gone. But I got a ping from our Ring camera system. Movement, 2:13 a.m., night after the confrontation. A woman in a hooded sweater climbed onto our porch and removed them. I enhanced the footage. She clicked her laptop. And there, projected on the wall via the meeting hall's tiny overhead screen, was Karen. Clear as day. Removing the chimes. Looking straight into the camera. She hadn't even covered her face properly. "I've filed a police report," Lena said. "And they've officially opened an investigation into criminal trespass and vandalism." Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my God." Karen stared at the screen. The projector's light made her look ghostly, unreal. For the first time since we'd moved in, she had no words. Just silence. The meeting adjourned early. Karen tried to gather her things with some measure of dignity, but no one looked her in the eye. Paul stepped forward, announcing an emergency vote for her removal as HOA president, per Section 3.8 of the bylaws. It passed, unanimously. As we left, neighbors approached Lena one by one. Shaking her hand. Thanking her. Offering baked goods, hugs, even just nods of respect. People who had been too scared or too tired to push back finally saw the Queen of Fines dethroned. Later that evening, we sat on the porch. A new pair of wind chimes, quieter, yes, but just as beautiful, hung above us. Lena sipped her tea, looked out over the street, and said, she thought she owned this place. She forgot, I replied, that the HOA works for the homeowners, not the other way around. We clinked our mugs together. But as peaceful as it seemed, the storm wasn't over. Because the audit? It was just beginning. The very next week, things went from dramatic to downright cinematic. The county audit team arrived in 3 unmarked vehicles. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just 3 serious-looking people in button blazers and sensible shoes, walking into the HOA office like it was ground zero. Karen had been removed, yes, but she hadn't gone quietly. The day after her ousting, she sent out a neighborhood-wide email titled A Time of Reflection. In it, she claimed to be a victim of harassment, misinformation, and a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by vindictive residents with personal vendettas. She didn't name Lena, but everyone knew. She also swore she'd done nothing illegal and that her leadership legacy would be vindicated. But when the county auditors stepped inside the HOA office and sealed off 3 cabinets full of financial records, the tone changed. Fast. Paul, now interim president, texted Lena from inside the building, they've already found a dozen flagged transactions. They say it's worse than expected. Karen's legacy? About to be itemized into evidence. The following Saturday, a notice was taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Official update, HOA under county investigation. Lena didn't write it, Paul did. But he gave her full credit during a follow-up meeting held in the community park. Karen didn't attend. But her presence lingered. Especially when Officer Brady, the same one who had once saluted Lena on our porch, showed up again, this time in uniform, with a clipboard in hand. He approached Lena discreetly while she helped set up folding chairs. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to let you know, your complaint led to something bigger. The county's building a fraud case." Lena blinked. "How big?" "Forged invoices. False HOA violation records. At least 3 residents paid fines that were never recorded, just deposited into a private bank account tied to a shell company. Name on the account?" He showed her the paper. Karen Whitmore. 2 days later, it hit the local news. HOA president under investigation for fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. They even included the wind chimes incident in the segment. It became a running joke online. Comments poured in. Imagine being this pressed over wind chimes. All hail Lena the Liberty Chimer. Can someone get this woman a cape? She's a suburban superhero. Karen? She disappeared. No more emails. No more power walks through the neighborhood with her clipboard. Her once carefully curated front yard turned wild. Weeds crept into her petunia beds. The HOA banner she'd proudly hung on her porch vanished overnight. But Lena? She was just getting started. She launched a neighborhood committee, not to control, but to empower. She invited everyone to join. No titles. No nonsense. Just real people protecting their own peace. And at the first meeting, she stood up, wind chimes softly clinking behind her, and said, "I didn't do this to be right. I did this because no one deserves to live under someone else's fear." A round of applause broke out. Even Officer Brady, who'd come as a guest, nodded in respect. We thought that was the end. But then, the package arrived. Plain brown envelope. No return address. Inside? A USB drive. And a note. "If you really want to know what she was hiding, press play." Lena stared at the USB like it was a live wire. We didn't plug it in right away. Not until we scanned it for viruses, ran it through a laptop with no network connection, and prepared to record the screen just in case. Old habits, Lena's dispatcher training and my background in IT, taught us caution. But once the file opened, we knew we were looking at the final nail. The folder was titled HOA_backroom_logs. Inside were dozens of audio files, scanned documents, and a master spreadsheet that detailed, in Karen's own voice, exactly how she orchestrated years of deception. The first recording started mid-conversation. Karen's voice was unmistakable. "If I bury it under landscaping, no one will question it. We just approve the invoice, slide it through, and it's clean. The others? They don't even read the fine print." Another voice, a man's, hesitant. "What if someone audits us?" "They won't. Paul's a coward. And I've got the vote count rigged anyway. If someone pushes too hard, we hit them with nuisance violations until they sell." Lena hit pause. We sat in stunned silence. It wasn't just fraud. It was systemic harassment. A calculated campaign to use HOA rules not as community guidance, but as weapons. There were line items that mentioned neighbors we knew. Fines issued as pressure tactics. Fake violations created to nudge out elderly residents who couldn't keep up with Karen's perfectionist standards. One file labeled Operation Clean Sweep outlined an actual plan to rezone the block for developer buyout after forcing enough owners to sell. They were trying to gentrify the neighborhood through intimidation, Lena said, her voice cold. That night, Lena copied the entire drive onto 3 new USBs and hand-delivered them, one to Officer Brady, one to Paul, and one to the county's public corruption unit. The next day, an arrest warrant was issued. Karen Whitmore, once queen of our cul-de-sac, was taken into custody on charges of fraud, forgery, misuse of community funds, criminal trespass, and harassment. She was led from her home in handcuffs, past the very wind chime hook she once tore down, as news crews filmed from across the street. Neighbors gathered. No one cheered. No one jeered. They just watched, silent and still. But as Karen was placed in the back of the cruiser, one sound did cut through. Clink. A new wind chime, freshly installed on Lena's porch, caught the breeze. The HOA underwent a full overhaul. New bylaws were drafted, reviewed publicly, and voted on in person. Transparency became the new mantra. Paul stayed on as president but only temporarily. He insisted the position rotate annually. Lena declined a formal role. Instead, she started a blog, HOA Watchdog. Stories poured in from across the country. People who had felt powerless. People now inspired to push back. As for us, life got quieter. Not perfect. Not drama-free. But peaceful in the way we hadn't felt since moving in. And every now and then, someone knocks on our door to ask about the story. Lena smiles. Offers them a cup of tea. And points to the wind chimes. "Want to hear how it all started?" she says. Because justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes, it whispers in the breeze.